Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Childress, and I am the managing attorney of the Childress Firm, a boutique employment law firm based in Washington, D.C. I'm so excited to come to you this morning, afternoon, wherever you are. It's morning here where I am in Washington. I just had my coffee, so I'm excited about that. But I want to talk to you about key items to consider before leaving a toxic workplace. As many of you know, the Childress Firm will be releasing its first online course, an ebook, later, actually early next year. And this information is to educate those who are working in toxic workplace about their employment law rights. The information in this content, including the content that I'm bringing to you today, is for educational purposes only. The information doesn't create an attorney-client relationship between you, the listener, and me or the Childress Firm. But I hope that this content does empower you to understand more about your employment law rights. The information does not replace that of a practicing attorney. I am an attorney. I'm licensed to practice in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. However, this content does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and me. However, again, I do hope that you will seek out an employment law attorney if you are enduring a toxic workplace or a workplace that you believe is toxic, so that you can better understand your rights and get the relief that you are entitled to. Okay, so let me start by just giving you just a general overview of what we talked about last time. In the last discussion, we talked about, is there anyone in my life that I need to discuss the decision to leave with before I terminate my employment? What personal value and satisfaction does my job give me? Will I miss my work routine? And will I miss my colleagues? So we talked about all of those considerations. And if you would like to listen to that prior discussion, please do click on one of the previous posts. And I actually don't have the date of that post, but if you scroll through our Instagram feed, or if you're watching on Facebook, please do take a look at one of those prior posts and you will see me discussing these topics. This will be a multi-part discussion. And so please do subscribe so that you will get updates, and you will also get the replays of these recordings in your email inbox. So please do subscribe by clicking on the link in our bio. The link will also be in the comments here. So please subscribe so that you'll get updates as to when I'm coming back online to discuss these topics. And you'll also get the replays of these discussions. Additionally, if you subscribe, you will get this checklist of key items to consider before leaving your toxic workplace. So you'll have that checklist right there at your fingertips if you do subscribe. And I'll also be releasing other free educational content about workplace rights and things to consider before leaving a toxic workplace. All right, so with that out of the way, let's continue this discussion about key items to consider before leaving your workplace. So we can't underestimate the financial cost of leaving a workplace. Our workplace does give us financial value, right? We are paid by the hour, we're paid a salary. So it's important to consider, what are you leaving behind financially if you leave your workplace? If you don't have a job lined up, you should think about, how long will it take you to find another job? Will you have to move in order to work? And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. So what is the cost of leaving? What's your monthly salary? How long can you go without that salary? Do you have savings lined up? Do you have someone else who can chip in to help with the mortgage and the monthly bills? So these are all considerations that you should put on your pros and cons list when you're thinking about leaving. The financial cost will affect the timing of when you decide to leave a toxic workplace. So really sit down and strength test your finances. Think about, think if you really want to leave your workplace immediately, think about how you can budget so that you are making the best financial decision for you. Because again, we can't underestimate the financial toll that it could take if you do leave a workplace without another job lined up. Next, I want to talk about, and closely related to the last topic, but next I want to talk about your healthcare benefits. Do you have dependents that depend on your healthcare benefits? Do you rely on your healthcare benefits that your job provides? So if your job is covering your insurance premiums, think about how that cost, what cost that is going to, what cost you'll incur by leaving your workplace. Do you have someone else who can help with your financial or with your healthcare benefits? Can you get onto someone else's plan? So these are really important considerations, because your job might not just affect you, it might affect the people who rely on you. So think about, do you or dependents have healthcare benefits that are dependent upon your working? Okay, so that's a really important topic to consider before you leave. Next important consideration is, do you have any non-competition agreements in place that limit your ability to work after you leave your company? So these non-competition provisions are called restrictive covenants, and often they restrict an employee's ability to work in a certain geographic region or with certain clients that this person worked with while working at the company for a certain period of time. So when you started working at a company, I'm sure that you signed many documents, and you may not remember everything that you signed or the exact language of what you signed. But if you're considering leaving your workplace, now is the time to go back through those agreements, ask what agreements are in place, ask HR, look at those agreements, review them with an attorney, and look at the specific language of those agreements so that you know exactly what you signed and what your obligations are post-employment. Okay, that's really important, because if you want to work in the same industry, if you want to start a company, if you want to work for a competitor, it's important that you do so legally and do so in a way in which you're not breaching any restrictive covenants that you have in place with your current employer, soon to be former employer, okay? Because you don't want to be a defendant in a breach of contract lawsuit, all right? So that's really important. If you are trying to negotiate any severance agreement, one of the items that you should negotiate is, hey, can I negotiate the scope of these restrictive covenants so that they're not so broad? If you're a doctor, you do likely have an employment agreement in place that restricts your ability to practice within a certain geographic region. So that is something, and then that's just one industry and profession that I can think of off the top of my head that typically does have an employment agreement in place that with restrictive covenants restricting their ability to work within a certain geographic area. So super important to think about as you are considering leaving is, where will I work? And, are there other limitations to where I can work? Are there limitations to where I can work? And for how long are these limitations in place? All right. So do think about those before you leave. My next key consideration: will my company provide me with a favorable reference that I can provide to my next employer? So you've worked for a company for a certain number of years, you've likely done really great work for that company. There's something that you are proud of, there's some achievement, some accomplishment that you are proud of based on your several years of service with a certain company. Now, you likely want someone to attest to that work. And once you leave, there really are no guarantees that someone will do that. So If you are trying to leave a company, if you are negotiating a severance package, it's really important to ask, hey, can I get a favorable reference? Can someone here write me a favorable reference? And you should agree to who that person will be. And it should be someone that you've worked with closely who can really attest to the work that you've done at the company. Many companies give favorable references just as a matter of policy, and those favorable references are just your dates of employment, how much you made, and your title. So that really doesn't give a prospective employer any substantive information on the caliber of employee that you were. So if you are negotiating a severance package, do think about, can I actually get someone here to give detail about how great I was as an employee? That you can always ask if you're not negotiating a severance package. You can always ask HR for that concession before you leave. But if you are negotiating a severance package, you should just get that in writing so that you have a promise from the company that they'll provide that particular reference after you leave. All right. So my next consideration is, how long will it take me to find another job? And this is closely related to what is the financial cost of leaving. So the longer that it takes to find you another job, the more that you're going to likely dig into your savings. So do think about, how long will it take me? If it takes me a long time, is that going to affect my mental health? Do I need to be working for a sense of purpose? Or do I need a break? Do I have enough time to take a break to really think about whether I want to pivot? Do I want to be in the same industry? Do I want to do I want to recreate myself, have a totally different industry? But how long will it take to find another job? That's important as you think about the financial cost of leaving. My next topic is, will I have to move to find another job? Now, this is closely related to the topic of, do I have any non-competition agreements in place limiting my ability to work? So if you do have a non-competition agreement in place, if you have not been able to renegotiate the scope of that agreement, and if it restricts you from working within a certain geographic area, depending on how large that geographic area is and how robust and broad that geographic scope is, you may have to move in order to continue working in the same industry. So that's just an important consideration, is, will you have to move? Even if you don't have a non-competition agreement in place, you may just have to move depending on where you live. If you live in an area where there's just not a lot of industry, you may have to move if you have to actually be in a physical location in order to complete your work. So this is an important consideration. If you're a doctor, again, I'm using doctors today, but if you're a doctor and you actually have to be physically in a place to provide service, you have to think about whether you have to actually move. If you are a professor and you actually have to be at a university or a college in order to provide service, then you may have to actually physically move. And so these are critical considerations as you're thinking about your next career move. Next consideration is, do I have an employment agreement that requires me to stay at my job for a certain period of time? This is a really important consideration because of the fact that many people have employment agreements. Many don't, but many do, that require them to provide a certain service for a certain length of time to their company. So who I'm talking to specifically is high-level executives. So C-suite executives, you likely have an employment agreement. You should know if you have an employment agreement, but not everyone knows. So if you have an employment agreement, there is likely a duration of time that you have promised to remain at the company. And if you were to leave the company, you typically have to give some sort of notice. So that's important to look at those agreements to understand, what have I promised to the company? How long do I have to stay here? If I have promised to leave, are there any notice provisions in my employment agreement to which I have to adhere? And how many days of notice do I have to provide? If I leave early, do I have to pay the company back? These are just, again, important considerations to keep in mind if you are considering leaving. So if you don't have an employment agreement in place, you've probably heard the term at will. That means you can leave at any time for any reason, as long as that reason is, and the employer can terminate you at any time for any reason, as long as that reason is a legitimate, non-discriminatory, and non-retaliatory reason. So if you have an employment agreement in place, you typically do have to stay for a certain period of time. If you don't have an employment agreement in place, you're likely at will. That's just a rule of thumb. Of course, there are variations to those two examples, but those are just our two baselines, okay? And so if you don't have an employment agreement in place, do you still have to give notice? Well, probably not, but legally, probably not. In terms of professionally, just as a professional courtesy, you should give notice, because think about it. No one wants to, I think it's a terrible, terrible precedent to set, and it's terrible for your reputation just to leave a company without giving any notice. So 2 weeks is typical, but that I would try to give as much notice as possible. 2 weeks is typical if you are leaving a job. So if you have an employment agreement in place, however, you may be required to give a certain amount of notice. So it's important that you know what you're required to do versus what you should do, okay? Now, closely related to this is there any agreement in place that requires me to pay back my employer if I leave a company? So this is super, super important as well. I know that for law firms, if you're coming out of law school, you're starting at a law firm, many law firms do pay for your bar expenses. So once you, and for your bar prep classes. So if you do leave, many law firms do ask that you pay that money back if you were to leave the company before a certain period of time. Now, that's not the case for all firms. That's not the case for all companies. If you are a doctor, your hospital or your practice might require you to pay back the fees that they may have paid for you to take your licensing exam, similar to law firms. So that's not the case for all industries, but you should know, what financial costs are you incurring if you were to leave, if any. So finally, again, the question is, do I have to give my job notice? And we talked about that with employment agreements, but it's a good idea to give your job notice if you are leaving. Now, some of that notice is legally required if you have an employment agreement in place. And if you don't, it's just a professional courtesy. All right. Now, next time I come to you, I'm going to be talking about the big question. And that question is, am I entitled to severance pay? That is the question that we will be tackling in my online course and in my ebook. Am I entitled to severance pay? So again, if you'd like to know when these updates are coming out and when these discussions are happening, please do subscribe to our newsletter. And you can do that by clicking on the link below. You can also click on the link in our bio where there is a subscription link. And I look forward to coming to you next time. Take care, everyone, and peace.